So we're going to be talking about different ways to solve quadratics. So we know that a quadratic is any term that has an x squared. And we've seen them in either vertex form or standard form. We're going to be focusing mainly on standard form, which will then help us to not only graph, but also to find solutions and other values that we're working with for quadratics. So solving quadratics by factoring. You've heard of factoring back in Algebra 1. This is a refresher for you now. You want to remember that the two numbers multiply to c and two numbers that add to b. Now you're talking about your standard form ax squared plus bx plus c. So the numbers multiply to your value of c and again add to your value of b. So our first example says y equals x squared plus 5x plus 6, and you want to make sure that we're factoring this. In order to factor this, what numbers multiply to 6? Well, you have the options of 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. So 6 times 1 is 6, but 6 plus 1 gives us 7. Or vice versa, we could subtract as well, and 6 minus 1 would give us 5. So it's either going to be 5 or 7, but not going to add up or multiply to 6. In this case, 2 times 3 also multiplies to 6, and 2 and 3 adds to 5. And now they both have to be positive. So we separate them, we set up our factors, and factors are just sets of parentheses. And what multiplies to an x squared? Well, that's an x and an x. Now, what factors are going to multiply to 6 but add up to 5? Well, since they both have to be positive, we need a positive 2 and a positive 3. You can always check your work by foiling, which is also known as distributing or double distributing, where your first terms, x times x, gives you x squared. Your outside is 3 times x, which is 3x. Your inside is 2x. And your last terms are 3 times 2, which is 6, which simplifies back to where you started. So with factoring, you should never get a wrong answer because you can always check your work with foiling it out. So for our second example, it's a little different than the first. Y equals 3x cubed plus 6x squared minus 24x. Well, we don't know how to factor a cubic, so we have to look for other ways that can help us. One of the things that you always want to look for is a greatest common factor, or GCF. In this case, my GCF is going to be something that all of these terms happen to share. You should always look for this first. It'll make your life a lot easier. If you have 3x cubed, a 6x squared, and a 24x, well, they all share a 3x. 3x can be divisible into each of these values. So when I factor out this 3x, it now goes to the front of my set of parentheses. And I'm left with 3 divided by 3 is a 1, and x cubed divided by x is x squared. You subtract your powers with exponents. If I divide out my positive 6 divided by 3 is a 2. X squared divided by x is x. Now I have a minus, and 24 divided by 3 is 8, and x divided by x, well, that's just 1. So 8 times 1 is 8. From here, you can now factor this further, very similar to what we did over there. So the 3x remains. That stays out in front. What gives us an x squared? Well, that's an x times an x. We also need factors of 8 that add up to 2. So I have 1 and 8, 2 and 4, or 4 and 2, and 8 and 1.
Mr. Tardif, please call 802. Mr. Tardif,
very important
if you're
man.
still in the building, call 802.
So now these would either add to 7 or to 9. And depending on, we want them to be different signs. So it's either going to be a 7 or a 9. In this case, I can either have 6 or I can have 2, and I want the 2. So I'm going to work with these factors of 2 and 4 to add up to positive 2. Well, my outside terms and my inside terms are the ones that add together. So this gives me a positive 4x and a negative 2x, which does create a positive 2x. So you can always check your work out by foiling out these two factors here and then distributing a 3x to each of your terms. You should end up back to where you started. So now it's your turn, and we want you to factor completely and bring this to the next class. So you have these 5 examples. Please make sure that you're setting up your parentheses. Don't forget to check for your GCF. And also, we said set up your parentheses. And that's all.